This is how we talk about how Section 508 and plain language intersect. So please go ahead, Katina and David.
So I'm David Lipscomb. As Katherine mentioned, I'm the vice chair at the Center for Plain Language. I think some of you know me through the federal report card. I run the federal report card every year. I also teach at Georgetown, and in addition, I'm working with the ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, to as part of a working group to come up with some plain language standards that would be ISO credentialed. We're in the process of that. I think I've shared some of that on the plain language listserv. And I'm here because I need to learn more. And I am very interested in how the plain language community can integrate more of the kinds of things that the accessibility community has been working on, and it's so important. 508 compliance, and everything about Section 508 in the U.S., which obviously overlaps, mirror much that is going on with WCAG, the WCAG in Europe and elsewhere. Kat, do you want to add anything?
So this is Katina speaking. I'm Katherine Stapleton. I am by day, a program officer at the U.S. Department of Education, and I'm a Plain trainer, and most recently the co-chair of Plain. I started thinking about this in my work because we had a large number of documents and presentations that we had to get ready for the web, and we started thinking about the plain language things, but had not really paid any attention to 508 compliance, and had to do a large 508 review in which, quite frankly, almost everything we submitted to the 508 coordinator was rejected. And so we started to think about what the average employee on our team, but also those of us who are supposed to be working on plain language, needed to know about 508 to make our work easier, but also so that we could give better recommendations to people as we saw works in projects. So sort of, please do this, it'll be better later, and not that. So I definitely have more of an informal on the ground experience with this, as opposed to being in a formal 508 role in our agency. Katherine?
I am GSA's plain language officer, and in my previous job, I also did a lot of web work, posting to the web, and I was the one who had to check for plain language as well as 508, and it just struck me that, these things seem to be similar in slightly different paths. So that's sort of how I thought of the topic, and I thought, we have enough people in both topics that, people would probably be interested in discussing this a little more.
Yes, and we could see from the introductions that we have several 508 people on the line, and so we might call them out during the conversation to provide feedback. So in fact, if you find that you have feedback to a question, go ahead and mention that in the comments so that we can reach out to you directly.
Yeah, I'll be moderating the chat questions, so it won't be something that we have to wait to do. So Katina, how do you want to start talking about what we do with plain language and 508?
So why don't we just first start by throwing out a big question, and then we can narrow things down as people have additional questions. So one of the things that we thought about was, what do plain language experts need to know about 508 conformance? And one of the things that we thought is that you should start with actually understanding what 508 is. And if you go to section 508.gov, you can find really good primers on what 508 requires. One of the other things that we thought would be really useful to people is to understand that you need to incorporate accessibility from the beginning. So in the same way we think about things needing to be written in plain language from the beginning, you need to think about accessibility. And so if we think about what the core tenets of plain language are, which is writing for your audience, that you really need to consider as part of your audience persons with disabilities, and think about what they would need to understand the content that you're putting on the website or in whatever way you're distributing the materials. What did you think, David?
David, you may be muted.
I was muted, of course.
Yeah.
It is a little more complicated to get over to the unmute button, at least for me. Real quickly, no, I think that's right, and the thinking about the readers is something we all do in plain language. That's where it starts, and I think it's so important, for us and to really figure out what that means in terms of our readers, our audience who have disabilities of various kinds. And one of the things in just talking to Bethany and reading some of things that she wrote before this meeting that came up is just that struck me is it's not only thinking about persons with disabilities, but that also starts to include assistive technologies. And I think that that's really, for me, something that has already come out of this meeting in a way. That as Katina has mentioned, I mean, we need to think about our audience. That's basic to plain language. Really be advocates as well for persons with disabilities. But one of the things about that is that, I'm starting to realize more and more that that means thinking about assistive technologies and how they work, and, thinking about that as we think about our audience.
If we could take a step back and discuss maybe what do we mean by a disability? Because that seems to be a big question too.
This is Bethany at OPM. Can I jump in?
Please.
Okay. Yeah, so I am OPM Section 508 Program Manager, and I know Bruce Bailey, you're on the call as well. He's from the Access Board. I don't know if any other 508 people are on the call, but, if you are, please let us know in the chat. So the interesting thing about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, that the U.S. federal government is now following instead of doing their own thing, which we were doing for a long time, is that it goes beyond the, blind, low vision, colorblind, hearing or hearing impaired, reduced strength or reach, and it goes on to things like cognitive disabilities, learning disabilities, print disabilities, including dyslexia, and even limited English proficiency. And I think that's where the overlap with plain language is just so obvious. And also we have to remember that you can have a disability that's long-term, short-term, situational. We talk about what it's like to live in the world we live in right now. And also, even if it's long-term, doesn't mean you didn't just acquire it yesterday. And so people are going to have very different levels of comfort with technology generally, because we're human, and with their assistive technology in particular, if they even have access. And then everybody's disability is going to be different, and they're going to interact with their technology differently, in part because of who they are, and in part because of the disability that they are experiencing at the moment. Does that make sense? And
yes.
Did I leave anything out, Bruce?
Yeah.
Catherine, if I can interject, I see that we have someone here from VA. Would you like to jump in from your perspective on how we might think about people having different types of disabilities, Jennifer?
Sure. So the way I talk about it is we have some folks who actually have identified disabilities, things that could be, can you hear me okay? Because I wasn't,
yes,
so I didn't put my Bluetooth things in. So we have people who have identified disabilities such as they're blind, or they have cerebral palsy and they have hand weaknesses, etc., or cognitive impairments like PTSD, traumatic brain injuries. But we also have people with temporary disabilities or situational disabilities or considerations. I like to use the word considerations. If you have a newborn or you have a new dog and you haven't been getting any sleep at night, you will benefit from us thinking about this stuff. If you've been working too much, if the pandemic is stressing you out, you will benefit from thinking about these considerations. Does that help?
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I guess one of the things is to consider how do we get past, how do we help people with disabilities and, you know, sort of move forward with not only plain language and the things that we've talked about, but what's known largely as Section 508 accessibility.
So Catherine, prior to this call, we'd come up with a few things that we could share. And then also if people want to put them in the comments, we can also share those. So we had talked a little bit about the use of styles in documents. So sometimes people are out bolding headings and things like that on their own, but that just really is emphasis for people who can see visually. But if you use a heading, it actually has something that can be picked up by a reader so that you can tell that you've moved to a different type of a section. The same thing for using the numbering in Word. So the actual numbering and not typing them in by hand, or creating real footnotes and not things that you just typed into the footer. So those types of things help for readers.
We should add that we do have a document we'll be sharing afterwards in case, you know, we're able to collect any new insights on it. But, you know, a lot of this is how are people looking at the requirements and how easy is it to do? I mean, I get this all the time that sometimes plain language editing is just too hard for people, which I have trouble believing. But, you know, sometimes Section 508 compliance looks difficult. Do you want to have the questions as they come, or do you want to wait for a little bit so you can put some more introductory material in?
Either works fine for me.
Okay, we have a question from Bruce Bailey, and this could be, you know, anyone on the team. But he says, one interesting thing to me is that many plain language experts were disappointed how few requirements got into WCAG 2.0. And he adds the next generation of WCAG 3 or Silver is hoping to do better with that. So I was wondering if you had any ideas on how that might go.
Well, Bruce, a lot of us in the plain language community are just learning more about, you know, web content accessibility guidelines, I guess known commonly as WCAG, and you know, the kind of interface, because that is really what we're talking about, the interface between or the intersections. You know, where plain language meets accessibility, and the attempts to infuse things like WCAG and Section 508 with plain language principles, as well as infuse plain language guidelines and principles with more principles, more knowledge from the accessibility community.
So I want to, since I work at the Access Board, I want to frame this by saying that the Access Board in 508 is not doing anything to move towards off of WCAG 2.0. So 2.0 is the 508 requirement. Since then, but I'm active in the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium Accessibility Guidelines Working Group. They call themselves AGLers. And they've been there's about a year ago there's a WCAG 2.1 that came out that added a few more requirements to 2.0. Again, it doesn't affect the federal government, and hopefully by the end of this calendar year there'll be a WCAG 2.2 which adds a few more requirements. But there was many people interested in the cognitive language, learning, clear language, plain language. Were disappointed with the evolution of WCAG 2.0 from 1.0. WCAG 1.0 actually had more requirements for plain language than 2.0 does. But one of the things that happened from going from WCAG 1 to WCAG 2 was a real sincere, concerted effort to make sure the requirements, the success criteria, were true, false, yes, no statements. And the plain language requirements that are in WCAG 1.0 were fuzzier than that. So from that one point, WCAG 2.0 is a huge improvement over WCAG 1, but there were some step backwards, especially in the plain language and some of the cognitive issues, language and learning issues. So there's also been a parallel group working on this next generation. I'm going to call it WCAG 3, or sometimes it's referred to as Silver. They got that from AG, Accessibility Guidelines. The chemical name for silver is AG, so that's why they've been calling it silver. Very clever, right?
That is.
Yeah. But that work is going slowly. The biggest problem right now is that, how is it going to be measured and what's going to be the conformance model? And I just pasted in the link in there that clear language is one of the major guidelines that they're going to be covering, and it's different than the WCAG 2.0. So that's something to look forward to as that develops. And again, they were hoping to have a editor's draft up by what they call first call public working draft in time for the CSUN conference in March, which of course, the CSUN conference went ahead, but the editor's draft did not. So hopefully, again, by this calendar year, there'll be this 3.0 version. So there's going to be this 2.2, which is a W3C specification. It's finalized. And then there's also going to be this WCAG 3.0, or I'm not sure if it's going to be 3.0 or it's going to be something, so it's a similar name. But that's going to be a completely new approach. And I pasted into the chat a glimpse of the clear language portion of that.
Thank you. This is all really helpful. And, because I think this is something else we were talking about before the meeting, is that, it's not just that the plain language community needs to learn, and we do, more from the accessibility community and work together more closely with the accessibility community. It works the other way as well. And I think we have a lot to learn from each other, as I think Katherine put it that way. So this is great. I think that it's also good to, just figure out, or just talk about what, going the other way, what we in the plain language community need to know and learn. This is our starting question. What we need to learn, know about accessibility to help us improve our job as advocates for the reader, and really thinking about what does it mean in our jobs, our day-to-day jobs, if we not only think about our readers in terms of their demographics, in terms of psychographics, all those things, but also in terms of the disability, the various ways that our readers might be disabled. including situational disabilities, which is obviously something we've talked about more and more. So I just want to turn it over to anybody who, or just raise in the chat, somebody who has something more to say about that opening question of ours, which is, what do we practitioners in the plain language community need to learn from the accessibility community?
Hi, this is Katina again. I wanted to insert something. I thought Catherine wrote something really meaningful in the comments. And it says, in other words, you can do all the graphic things, but if you don't experience it the way the user will experience it, you can't really know or fix what needs to be fixed. And so it's really struck me in my experiences is that someone correct me if I'm wrong, there's really two different buckets of ways people are going to get our text. One, they're going to be reading it, and the other is they're going to be hearing it. And so it was really instrumental for me in thinking about the intersection between accessibility and plain language when our 508 coordinator had us listen to what our text sounded like coming through a screen reader. And it really made a difference in thinking about all of the long run-on sentences, how difficult it was to absorb that information when read out loud by a reader. So it wasn't anything different that we didn't already know from plain language guidelines, but the impact of it was really helpful. And the same for visuals. So we're often so caught up in the words, we're not thinking about formatting, but a lot of the accessibility tips are really formatting tips that overlap with the formatting tips that we use for plain language. So looking at a page looking at a page through a viewer that mimics what it would look like to someone that's colorblind will show you really easily why people can't tell the different things apart on your pages. And so I think that those types of experiences, sort of putting ourselves in the shoes of our reader, might be helpful to us moving forward.
Yeah, this is Bethany again. That is absolutely just correct when it comes to getting people to understand why this matters and how awful it is if you don't fix it. But I do want to stress for people that you don't need to go out and buy JAWS. You don't need to go out and buy Dragon. You don't need to go out and buy like every last available assistive technology to create or test. And the two links I put in the chat are particularly important. The section 508.gov/create, you'll get videos from the Accessible Electronic Document Community of Practice, the AEDCOP, and checklists and guides and everything else that you could possibly imagine for Word and PDF and Excel and PowerPoint, and I don't even remember what else. And then if you're up to it, you can take the Trusted Tester training from DHS, and that will actually get you certified to test web pages for accessibility. And that is all done a combination of manually and with some really lightweight tools.
It struck me, Bethany, that there's a lot of parallel paths going on with Section 508 and accessibility, and for right now I'm using them interchangeably, and plain language with everything. So I feel I know a little bit, but not enough.
Well, I think that we all feel that way forever, right? So that's part of the problem. You never feel like you know enough. Mm-hmm. But stripping it back to what you actually don't know enough, learning is a process, right? So I agree completely. I don't know what to say about it, though.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things. One of the things I have tried to do in the name of accessibility is try not to make everything a document. Like try not to make everything, a Word or a PDF. Maybe we can turn that into text, just on a web page, because I think that's a huge lift right there, because there's a lot of built-in stuff. If you use the styles, that helps a lot. And sometimes I just get things like, what purpose does this graphic serve? And sometimes the answers I get are like, well, it's really interesting. It's very technological. And at that point, I usually leave early for lunch and, refuse to talk about it. But, it really does come down to those conversations you have with people that you say, what are you trying to do? And how is this helping? It also has struck me that people get very excited in both plain language and 508. They get very excited about the technology. Bethany, you were saying earlier that people did not have to run out and get JAWS or whatever. And in the same way that we say, we don't recommend any particular app or software for plain language. Some people use them and they like them and they seem to work for them, which is great. But, Plain has always thought, what we need is, people need to know. This is not something you can outsource to just a computer or a laptop or a tool. Bethany, what's your take on the technologies, or Katina for the plain language tools?
I'd like to respond on the training question. I was trying to jump in before and forgot I was on mute. So So
learning process.
Yes, I'm also at the Department of Education, and so I want to echo my colleagues' plea that people actually take 508 training, and not just the person that's responsible for plain language. So in our office, it was helpful. I took the training as our 508 training as our plain language person, but we also had 5 other people in the office take it, so that people writing documents would also understand what the basic tenets were, because we were finding that they were putting documents together and 1 or 2 people would spend hours trying to make them fit. And so by having I'd say it's about 1/3 of our team take the training, including our commissioner, it really helped us be able to make sure that people were thinking about accessibility from the beginning and not at the end.
That's an excellent point. That really is an excellent point. And if I missed it in the earlier question, I'm sorry. It's what generally happened, at least, is I was working in the IT group and I would get a document that they'd say, this is being awarded, tomorrow. Can you make sure it's 508 compliant? And I'm like, well, sometimes, and then, sometimes it would be, you really need to work on this. And so I don't actually feel that, as you pointed out, Katina, it's not just the responsibility of the 508 coordinator or the plain language person. Everyone needs to know how to make that particular, how to make a document 508 compliant if they are in the job, if their position ends up dealing with documents. It's not something you give to the intern. And this has been a difficult thing because so many people are doing double duty. Bethany, I think you can speak to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm supposed to be the 508 coordinator or program manager and the plain language person, but that change was supposed to happen about 8 months ago and it hasn't yet. But for years, I was also the records officer. Oh, I got news today. It looks like it might actually happen, but we've heard that news before. So we're not going to believe it until it happens. But yeah, for years, I was also the records officer. That is no fun. But what as far as getting people to be able to do their own 508 work, my hope is that for your average easy document, they can get themselves the whole way there. For more complex documents, they can get themselves 80% there. And for forms, they know enough not to try.
I hear you on the forms. Just don't do them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, let somebody who is actually a forms expert do your forms.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, that's probably not me unless it's an internal form, because I don't have the graphic design ability or tools.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that one of the things 508 and plain language share is sort of being dumped on. You know, it could just be me, but just that feeling of, why am I responsible for everything when this should have happened at the beginning of the process?
Right. Yeah. Why are you coming to me after it's already been published? The other thing I've started doing, I used to be very nice. If some other agency's thing showed up at our doorstep and somebody at OPM wanted to post it internally, I would fix it. And now I say, no, you go back to that agency that gave you the inaccessible content and you tell them to fix it. Because it's not our job to do all the other agencies' work on top of our own.
Mm-hmm.
I just had to make that decision because, especially with this COVID stuff, every 30 seconds there's a new document and they're coming from other agencies and they're never coming accessible. And if ever there was a time that everybody needed access, it's now.
Yeah.
Hi there. This is Justin Isofman from New York City Mayor's Office of the Chief Technology Officer. We have a similar problem. We get a lot of documents, and we have a development and a design team in-house. What is the best way that we can engage someone like you early in the process to ensure that you don't get a quote-unquote final document delivered to you? What is the best way that we can work with a 508 officer or a plain language writer to make sure that that's integrated early on in the process?
That is the best question ever.
Yeah.
Because we like to hear that question. What I usually tell people is to go to Section 5. I'm assuming they're working on a document, right? If they're working on a system or something like that, then I want to sit down with them really, really at the beginning. Just give me a call, email me, whatever it is. Say, hey, we're thinking about creating this big system. It's going to be government-wide. Please start coming to our bi-weekly meetings. But let's say you're writing a document. Then what I want you to do is I want you to go to section508.gov/create. I want you to learn what there is to be learned from that about the format that you're working with, or formats, because chances are it's going to be Word then PDF. And then I'll feel that you are ready to come have I was going to say an intelligent conversation. That's not what I mean, obviously, but an informed conversation about where your problems are going to lie. And that's when we can get you to the 80%. The second time around, it'll be on your own. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you so much.
And I think
Sure.
also we have some checklists. I mean, I know there are some plain language checklists, but that's sort of predicated on a perfect world where there's no crushing production schedule. And you say, okay, so for plain language, here's what it's supposed to be. Here are some of the techniques. Why are you writing, and who is your audience? And sort of work on it from that. And if you can get questions about what's your schedule on this, is always a very good one. And what effect is this supposed to have, and who all is involved in reviewing it. I see that we have a question from Colton about, how do you protect your writing from reviewers who try to add policy heavy and other non-plain language preferences? Sometimes you simply have to hide and not let them have it. One of the things that GSA does is, we're a Google shop and we use Google Docs, and I make other people sometimes do their edits as suggestions so I can see what they've changed. I do not want, I want a very specific editing cycle. I don't want everybody just sort of going in like a scrimmage and changing everything. I want to see, edits in order. And then I say yes, or, oh, I've noticed you've started adding this phrase, and I'm just picking on this because I've seen it a lot lately. Out of an abundance of caution, you need something more specific. You can't fall into that because we're not sure what it means. I'm not sure, Colton, that answers your question entirely, but you know, sometimes you have to make some decisions and sit on people.
And so this is Katina. I would interject that in this case, plain language is a little bit different from 508 conformance, because with plain language, we have more of a moving target. We can think about how can we make this better, not perfect. Whereas with 508 conformance, there are actually things that you need to do to make sure your document is accessible and would pass the rules. So I think that that's something that you should think about. And then I would also say we're in a time where you probably can't do all of the training that we would want you to do. And so the easiest things to do is to loop someone in as early as possible. Send them an email, send them a call saying, we're doing this really important document about, I'll just make something up, the techniques you should use to go grocery shopping for the coronavirus. You want that to be as clear as possible from the beginning. So as soon as you think about putting that together with the content experts, have your plain language person on the call with you so that they can help you organize the information in a way that will be easy to follow, as opposed to putting together something and then giving it to them at the end, because then they would not have been privy to the thought about why you wanted some information included and not others. I hope that helps.
I was also considering, I was looking at the chat, and Judy was mentioning how MS Word has an accessibility checker, but there's a lot it doesn't cover. And it made me think, you know, I often think I know more than I do. You know, I used to run 508 checks in, you know, for a certain thing, and I don't even remember the entire context, but what I had been shown, you know, what my coworker has shown me is this is how you do it. This is how you get it to pass. And so I was like, oh, okay. And then I would do that. And then I found out that there were some other things that could also be done. And I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was doing what I was supposed to. So.
This is Diana Huffman again from the Department of Ed. Can I interject? The very hard thing about having your coworker train you or teach you 508 compliance is that they only take what the information that they think is important. And if they weren't trained, if they sat down and they learned it from some other coworker, you're not going to learn everything. 508 accessibility training for Word documents is a whole lot more than running it through the Word accessibility checker. Just the same as is true with PDF. It's a whole series of things. In PDFs, it's about moving tags, removing decorations and turning them into artifacts and things like that, which you wouldn't be taught by a coworker. You would need, like I said, to take actual training. And the training is best done, in my opinion, in person, as opposed to trying to take training over, through an internet class or whatever, because the class often moves faster than a person absorbs the information.
I don't know. This is Bethany. I definitely teach all of those things, and I also have remote workers, and I've had a lot of success teaching them over, well, in their case, they prefer to use Blue Jeans, but, over a Zoom-like or a WebEx-like thing. It's just not always practical, and nor do all agencies have the money to have somebody other than their 508 coordinator doing the training.
Oh, to me, that's very interesting, because the Department of Ed is well known for not having a whole lot of money. And we have coordinators who teach, we have an technology accessibility team that teaches, but then we also send people off for training at GPO.
Yeah, I've been to some of that training at GPO. Bethany is fantastic. And then I turn around and teach people what she taught me. There's no way OPM is going to send any more than maybe
Yep.
1 or 2 other people. So they have to rely on their coworker, i.e. the 508 section program manager, section 508 program manager to do the team. And just because you happen to work at the same agency doesn't mean that you don't know enough to get rid of artifacts, for example.
You know, we have a new question, which is a working file required to ensure AA or higher compliance, or can a PDF be delivered by a client and be remediated in Acrobat to the same level of accuracy? It's sounding, Hannah is saying it sounds to her that it can't be accurately remediated from a PDF given the conversation right now. So if somebody could answer that.
Okay. God, that's an incredibly complex question, because did you get the PDF as a scan? Because if you did, I'm really sorry for you. But if you got a PDF that was made from a halfway decent Word document, you can tag it properly. It's going to be 8 million times more difficult than if you had had a decent, than if you'd had access to the source file and cleaned it up first. So it really just depends on the details of that document and how much of a disaster, how much of a disaster the original was, what program it was created in, those kinds of things. There's no one answer.
Hi, Catherine. We had a couple of questions. I think they're related, and if we can loop back to them. And that's
Sure.
about one says, where can we take training for 508? And then we have another follow-up one about given the current COVID-19 crisis, is there opportunities for digital training that people can take, since in-person training obviously might not happen for a while?
I don't know about the in-person training, but we can look up GPO and double check and send that out to everyone for that. It depends. I think obviously your point right now is the odds of anyone getting training are slim, and a lot of things are going to virtual. So, we may have to, deal with not quite the best experience. Kirby also mentioned that at least GSA does not have the latest Word footnote, and we don't have the latest version of Word, and our accessibility folks say that the newer versions have a better checker. So that is very good, But where have other people gotten 508 training? There is GPO, as we've heard, and maybe somebody else offers remote training that you could recommend.
So there's also, this isn't going to get you specifically how to use Word or whatnot, but the community of practice is it, Bruce, that's the stuff that Tim does. Can you explain that? Every other month there's a webinar. Oh, maybe we lost Bruce. Every other month there's a webinar that the Access Board puts on.
And I missed the mute button again. So every other month we have a 508 webinar, and I'll post in a link to those. And we're looking for suggestions on those. And then the Section 508 has a community meeting the alternate months that we don't have our webinars. So they have been previously in a pretty large format. They were going to be virtual for a while. So those are good. And, there's also possibilities to have something custom developed by either our 508 staff or John Sullivan's staff at GSA. The Access Board, we try to focus more on the standards and not on just how to do Word documents in an accessible way, because there's so many other people that provide that particular training. But that training is on, there's videos on the 508 site for that.
This is Diana Huffman again. If I can interject, you have the you have the government publishing office, which lists all of their classes that they offer. There's pubcom.com that offers classes. There's SoftTech in DC that offers classes. And there's another one that's taught through GPO before, which is Learn Smart, Think Big, or Think Big, Learn Smart.
Diane, can you send those things to Katina Stapleton in the Department of Education, and then we can include them with all of the files that we send to the people?
Stapleton. Sure. Yes, I will do that.
Thank you so much. That would be a huge help to everyone trying to get more training.
Yes.
And let's see. Yeah, and Katina, your point that people should check with their own agencies about 508 training, I think that's a good point. Excuse me, Katina, the status of the plane training with the quarantining and the COVID and the quarantining and staying at home, we are not accepting any plain language training requests right now. Now, just to go over this very briefly, the Plain Language Action and Information Network offers free training to federal agencies in the DC metro area. It's also free if you're outside the DC metro area, but you have to pay for travel and per diem costs. Just that's how it works. And we decided, we just said, we don't know how long this is going to last. We're just going to say we're not accepting training requests. And so we took that down. When this is over, I hope that we're able to reinstate that. We do have some videos. Erin, you had a question about favorite resources for plain language. I would definitely try plainlanguage.gov. We're on social media. There's things all the time. The Plain Language Listserv, which you can join if you would like, if you're not already. We post a lot of articles and opportunities and ideas. It's a reasonably active list. And, that's just one of the possibilities. We have some things thank you, Amanda and Judy, for posting some 508 classes. Yeah. And, check with your own agencies. And even there's a list of program managers in Section 508, which is really good. And Bethany has been sending a lot of links. And I think that on those links we probably have, Carolyn, the basic advice and checklists. Although that's sort of the same problem I mentioned with the plain language checklist before. You get an idea of some techniques and some direction, but that doesn't really give you the big picture. Sometimes, checklists can be a good fail-safe. I believe that we are coming up on the end of the thing. Katina, David, did you have anything else you wanted to add before I close us up?
I just want to add that this is a learning experience for everyone on both sides, and that really it's just our responsibility to do better.
I think that's great. And I'll just add that it's been a learning experience for me. And this has been really terrific. And I just love the way this discussion has gone. I've found that the chat has been as valuable as what we've heard. So I just thank you to everybody, because I think this has just been terrific.
Great. Thank you both. And Bethany, thank you for chiming in on occasion with your knowledge.
Thank you.